The Hargrove Grand Hotel on Forsyth Street in downtown Jacksonville, Florida, had a lobby that was designed to make a specific kind of impression, the kind that communicated, before a single word was exchanged, that this was a place of consequence. A place where the quality of everything from the marble underfoot to the temperature of the air had been carefully considered and deliberately maintained at a standard that justified the nightly rate printed in small, confident numbers on the booking website. The lobby's centerpiece was a coffee and tea lounge called the Forsyth Room, which occupied the south end of the ground floor behind a low partition of dark walnut paneling and brass fixtures, and which served a rotating menu of pressed sandwiches, house-made pastries, and coffee sourced from a single-origin roaster in Costa Rica that the hotel's marketing materials described in language that suggested the beans had been individually encouraged rather than harvested. The Forsyth Room had 14 tables, each dressed with a white linen cloth and a small vase of fresh flowers that were replaced every 2 days, and it operated during morning and afternoon service hours with a staff of 4, a hostess, 2 servers, and a busboy who was responsible for the clearing and resetting of tables, the restocking of the service station, and whatever other tasks fell between the formal job descriptions of the people around him. On a gray Wednesday afternoon in January, 12 of the 14 tables sat completely empty. The lunch rush had ended an hour ago and the afternoon tea service had not yet drawn its usual small crowd, and the room had the particular quiet of a well-maintained space between purposes, silverware aligned and flowers fresh and no one needing anything from anyone just yet. The young man working the bus station that afternoon was named Theo Raymond Greer, and he was 23 years old and had been at the Hargrove Grand for 7 months, which was long enough to know the rhythms of the room and short enough that he had not yet stopped actually seeing it, the details that familiarity eventually renders invisible. He was working his way through a business administration program at Florida State College at Jacksonville 2 evenings a week and Saturday mornings, paying for it course by course because the full-time tuition was not something his current situation could absorb all at once, and the job at the Hargrove was the one that made the course-by-course approach possible. Along with the second job, he worked on Sunday afternoons at a catering company out of the Riverside neighborhood that handled corporate events and the occasional wedding. He was not unhappy about any of this. He had been raised by a grandmother named Ruth Ann in a house on the west side of Jacksonville who had taught him that working for the thing you wanted was not a hardship but a form of self-respect, and he had internalized this so thoroughly that it had become less a philosophy and more simply a description of how he moved through his days, steadily, without drama, with the particular quiet confidence of someone who knows what they are building even if the building is going slowly. He was wiping down the service station counter when the woman walked in, and he noticed her the way he noticed everyone who entered the room, fully, without performance, simply because paying attention was part of how he did the job. She was in her mid-70s, Theo guessed, small and deliberate in her movements, dressed in a tan overcoat that had seen considerable weather over the years, its hem fraying at the bottom edge in the way fabric frays when it has been washed many times and dried on a line. Her shoes were dark leather flats with a crack along the right toe that had been polished over but not concealed. She was carrying what appeared to be a plastic shopping bag from a Winn-Dixie, not a purse, not a tote, but a grocery bag, its handles looped over her wrist, containing something that made a faint rustling sound when she moved. Her white hair was pinned back neatly, and she walked with a cane that she used with the practiced efficiency of someone who had long since made peace with the cane and was no longer self-conscious about it, and her face had the composed, observant quality of a person who has spent a long life watching rooms and has developed strong opinions about what rooms reveal about the people running them. She approached the hostess stand at the entrance of the Forsyth Room, where a young woman named Courtney Blaine was on duty, 26 years old, 18 months at the Hargrove, and possessed of a particular radar for the category of guest she was currently looking at, a radar that had been calibrated less by malice than by a professional culture that had taught her, in ways both explicit and ambient, that the presentation of a guest was a reliable index of their value to the establishment. And that her job was the stewardship of the room's character, which meant that some decisions about seating were less about availability and more about the preservation of an atmosphere that other guests had paid to inhabit. Courtney looked up from the hostess stand and took in the woman in front of her, the overcoat, the cracked shoe, the Winn-Dixie bag, in the single practiced second that hospitality professionals develop for the rapid categorization of arriving guests, and she said, with a flatness that was not quite rudeness but was close enough to it that the distinction barely mattered, That the room was fully committed this afternoon and there were no tables available. She said it while looking at the reservation book on the stand rather than at the woman, and she said it in the particular tone that communicates not just the information but the finality of the information and the inadvisability of pressing further. The woman, whose name, though neither Courtney nor Theo yet knew it, was Margaret Louise Hargrove, looked at Courtney for a moment, then let her gaze move slowly and deliberately across the 12 empty white-clothed tables behind her, and then back to Courtney, and she did not challenge the statement, because she was not the kind of woman who challenged statements in the moment she encountered them, having found over 70-odd years that there were more instructive ways of responding to what people revealed about themselves. She nodded once, quietly, and turned to leave, her cane making its small precise sound on the marble floor, and the Winn-Dixie bag rustled against her coat, and the room's curated silence absorbed the exchange as if it had not occurred. Theo Raymond Greer had watched the entire thing from the service station, his cloth still in his hand. He watched Courtney's face during it, and he watched Margaret's back as she turned, and something in him moved in the straightforward, uncomplicated way that things move in a person who has not yet been talked out of their instincts by the accumulated social calculus of institutional life. He did not consult the calculus. He set down his cloth, walked across the room to the nearest empty table, table 7, closest to the partition, with a fresh white cloth and a small vase of yellow freesia, and he pulled out the chair that faced the window looking onto Forsyth Street, the best seat at that table and one of the better seats in the room, and he said, in a voice warm enough to carry across the lobby without needing to be raised, that she was welcome to sit down, that he would bring her something warm. Courtney turned from the hostess stand with an expression that had moved past surprise into the specific territory of institutional alarm, and she said to him, in a low voice pitched to reach him and not the woman, that he needed to think very carefully about what he was doing, that this was not how the room operated, and that there would be consequences for it that she wanted him to understand clearly before he committed further to the direction he was currently heading. Theo looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at Margaret, who had stopped walking and turned and was now looking at him with an expression he could not entirely read, not surprise, exactly, and not gratitude yet, but something older and more considered than either of those things, the expression of a person who has seen a great many rooms and a great many people in them and is in the process of updating a long-running internal record. Theo pulled the chair out further and said that he hoped she liked soup, that he had a bowl of the tomato bisque set aside from his lunch and it was still warm, and he'd be happy to bring it with some bread if she wanted it. Margaret Louise Hargrove sat down. She sat with the unhurried ease of a woman who had made her decision and was comfortable in it, settling her cane against the table edge and placing the Winn-Dixie bag at her feet and folding her hands in her lap and looking out the window at Forsyth Street the way a person looks at a thing they know well and are seeing again with fresh attention. Theo went to the service station and retrieved the tomato bisque he had set aside in a covered container. It was, technically, his own lunch, purchased from the hotel kitchen at the employee discount rate he was entitled to, and he plated it properly, because he was working in the Forsyth room and this was how things were done in the Forsyth room, and he brought it out with a small basket of the sourdough bread that the kitchen baked in-house every morning, and he set it in front of her with the same attention and care he gave to every guest he served, not because he knew who she was but because he did not operate on a variable scale of attention based on what a person appeared to be worth. He asked her if there was anything else he could bring her. She said no, thank you, that this was more than she had expected, and there was something in the way she said it that was quiet and specific in a way that he noticed but did not fully parse in the moment, because he was already moving back toward the service station and the work that was waiting for him. Courtney watched all of it from the hostess stand with the expression of someone calculating the professional distance between herself and an event she had concluded was going to have consequences she did not want to share. She said nothing further. She straightened the reservation book. She looked at the wall. Margaret ate slowly and without hurry, the way a person eats when the meal is good and the seat is comfortable and there is nowhere more pressing to be, and when she was finished she sat for a few minutes longer with her hands folded on the table, looking out at Forsyth Street in the January gray, and then she reached into the Winn-Dixie bag at her feet and produced a small card, and she wrote on the back of it in handwriting that was precise and small and had not loosened with age the way some handwriting does, and she folded it once and set it on the linen beside the empty bowl. When Theo came to clear the table, she was already on her feet with her cane and her bag, and she reached out and patted his hand once, not sentimentally, but with the particular directness of a person who has decided to convey something clearly and is doing so in the most efficient way available, and she told him that he had a good heart and that she hoped he knew what that was worth. Then she walked out of the Forsyth room and across the lobby and through the revolving door onto Forsyth Street, and the room resumed its curated quiet as if she had never been there. Theo picked up the folded card from the table and turned it over and read the front and stood very still for a long moment in the middle of the Forsyth room with 12 empty tables around him and the January light coming through the windows and Courtney watching him from across the room with an expression that had begun to change in a way she could not entirely control. The card was a business card. On the front, it read, Margaret L. Hargrove, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Hargrove Hospitality Group, Jacksonville, Florida, with a corporate address and a phone number. Theo turned it over. On the back, in the same small precise handwriting, it said that she visited every property she owned twice a year without announcement and always dressed the way she had been dressed today, and that in 22 years of doing this she had found that it was the single most reliable method she had ever discovered for learning the true character of the people working in her hotels, and that in the past 4 years he was the first person at this property who had offered her a seat and treated her like a guest, and that she expected him in her office on the 14th floor at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, and that he should bring his resume and whatever he was working toward, because she intended to help him get there faster. Courtney Blaine read the card over Theo's shoulder. She read it twice. Her face went through several things in rapid succession, none of which she would remember clearly afterward, only the general sensation of the floor shifting beneath what she had believed to be solid ground. Theo folded the card carefully and put it in the chest pocket of his uniform, close and flat against him, the way you carry something you are not yet ready to fully believe in but are not willing to lose. He finished his shift. He cleared the remaining tables with the same attention he always gave them. He went home to his apartment on the north side and sat at the kitchen table where he did his coursework, and he called his grandmother Ruth Ann in the house on the west side and he told her what had happened, and she was quiet for a moment on the phone and then she said, in a voice she reserved for things she had always known and was waiting to be confirmed, that this was exactly what she had been telling him his whole life, that you treated every person like they mattered because they did, and that the world noticed even when you thought it wasn't watching, and that she was going to make him a proper dinner on Sunday and he should plan to come early. He showed up Friday morning at 9 o'clock on the 14th floor with his resume and his course transcripts from Florida State College and a list of what he was working toward, written out in the careful, organized way he did most things. Margaret Hargrove was already at her desk. She read everything he brought her without rushing. When she was finished she looked at him across the desk and she said that she had built 27 hotels over 40 years and that the most expensive mistake she had ever made, repeatedly and at great cost, was promoting people based on credentials and overlooking people based on appearances, and that she was not going to make that mistake today, and that she had a management training position open in the corporate office that she would like him to consider, and that it came with full tuition coverage for the remainder of his degree. The way you treat a person who can do nothing for you is the truest and most complete picture of who you actually are, not who you perform to be for the people you are trying to impress, but who you are when the audience appears to be absent and the choice costs you something real. Theo Greer did not offer that seat because he calculated a return on it. He offered it because a woman was being turned away from an empty room and that was wrong, plainly and simply, and his character did not require a more complex reason than that. The world's most important decisions are often made by the people we dismiss most casually, and they are watching us more carefully than we know, not to reward us or to catch us, but simply because how a person treats the seemingly powerless tells them everything they need to know. If this story moved something in you today, please share it with someone in your life who needs to be reminded that kindness without calculation is never naive, it is the most sophisticated thing a person can practice, and it is never, ever wasted.